Yeast infections can be quite aggravating for women. Yeast infections cause unbearable itching in the vagina and a thick white vaginal discharge. Most women have had at least one yeast infection. Many women get recurring yeast infections. Recurring yeast infections are yeast infections that happen periodically over the course of a year. First, I highly recommend you to stop spending so much money on yeast infection products that do not work. Use that money and invest in your knowledge about yeast infection instead. If you do not know where to start, I recommend you to pick up the ebook Yeast Infection No More written by Linda Allen. I have used his unique 5-step method to help me cure my yeast infection in as little as 12 hours. Why do I keep getting yeast infections and bacterial infections? Here are some causes for recurring yeast infections. Consuming too much sugar. If you eat a lot of junk food and sweets, then you are more likely to have constant yeast infection problems. You should not drink a lot of sugary drinks such as soda and juice. In order to maintain a healthy balance of vaginal yeast, you should consume as little sugar as possible. Poor nutrition. If you do not eat a balanced diet, then your immune system is weaker, so you are more likely to develop a yeast infection and bacterial infections. You take antibiotics. Constant antibiotic use can cause yeast infections. By having antibiotics in your system, you cause a yeast imbalance. You take birth control pills. Taking birth control affects your hormone levels and can affect your vaginal yeast and give you recurring yeast infections. Having unprotected sex. Unprotected sex can get germs into your vagina and make your vaginal yeast imbalanced. Always use protection when having sex in order to lessen your chances of getting a yeast infection and bacterial infections. Not drying your vagina after a shower or bath, allowing water to stay in your vagina, can cause recurring yeast infections. You should dry your vagina with a hair dryer. You should use the low heat option when drying your vagina. You are expecting a baby. Pregnancy causes hormonal imbalances which also make your vaginal yeast be imbalanced. You don't treat your yeast infection properly. If you let your original yeast infection go too long without being properly treated, then you are at a higher risk for recurrent yeast infections. You are diabetic. Diabetes is a disease which affects your sugar and glucose levels. If you have problems processing sugars, then this affects the balance of your vaginal yeast and can be one of the causes for recurring yeast infections. You have a lot of stress in your life. If you live a very stress-induced life, then you are more susceptible to illnesses including recurrent yeast infections. In order to avoid getting recurring yeast infections, you need to reduce as much stress from your life as is possible. Yeast infections are not fun at all. You feel uncomfortable and miserable. Yeast infections need immediate treatment in order to help prevent them from recurring. Hopefully, these causes for recurring yeast infections will help you figure out why your yeast infections are recurring. Then, you will have the knowledge to prevent your yeast infections from constantly recurring and causing you pain and discomfort. If you need further advice about how to prevent recurring yeast infections, you should consult your gynecologist.